A man gazed at the sunset across the desert. He was delighted with the immense physical beauty and just enjoyed the event in itself. Just sensing it was enough. Most of us experience things through our senses, touch, taste, our eyes. And really, that was enough for him. He had no interest in larger ideas or intuitions or the grand scheme of things. So he saw with the first eye, the eye of the flesh, which was good. Another man gazed at the sunset. He enjoyed the beauty that the first man did, but like all lovers of coherent thought, technology, and science, he also enjoyed his power to make sense of the universe, explain what he discovered. He thought about the cyclical rotations of planets and stars through imagination, intuition, and reason. He saw with the second eye, the eyes of the mind, which was even better. And then someone else saw the sunset, knowing and enjoying all that the first and the second man did, but in her ability to progress from seeing to explaining to tasting, she also remained in awe before an underlying mystery, coherence, and spaciousness that connected her with everything else. She used her third eye, which is the goal of all seeing and knowing, the eyes of the heart. And this was the best. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd. How does Jesus see the crowd? Is he just noticing them? Does he see with the eyes of the mind? He could count them. We know later there were 5,000 men. That's not even counting the women and children. Or does Jesus see with the third eye, the eyes of the heart? Mark tells us that when Jesus saw the crowd, he had compassion for them. Now, that's an interesting word, compassion. It really means that something moves inside. He had a gut reaction, or we might even say his heart went out to them. After Jesus' disciples were sent out on mission, as we heard last week, Mark interrupts the narrative to describe a meal that King Herod hosted in his palace, in which the head of John the Baptist was served for dessert. So Mark, of course, is commenting on the corrupt leadership, the shepherds who do not gather, but rather separate, divide, and scatter. Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began to teach them many things. Not only will Jesus teach them many things, but as the story goes on, we'll hear next week, Jesus also hosts a meal for these 5,000. He's going to feed them with 5 loaves and 2 fish in the wilderness. And in this meal, there will not only be enough, there will be some left over, and no one will be excluded. So that's the teaching. That's what Jesus is teaching his disciples. The disciples have just returned from their mission, and they gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. Now, it looks as if they're sort of exhausted from this mission, and they need a little time away, some little badly needed R&R. But in truth, the disciples have successfully completed Discipleship 101. They're freshmen, and now they're ready to be sophomores. Discipleship 201. They're ready to go to a deeper level. So Jesus says to them, "Come away to a deserted place and rest a while." Jesus is moving them into a new reality. Just as he sent them out last week with very specific commands, take no bread, no bag, no money in your belt, now he literally, physically is moving the disciples. So getting into the boat symbolizes the journey to a new place, to a new way of seeing and understanding. A deserted place is the wilderness. And the wilderness is the place where we meet God and are reconnected. We sing the song of Hosea, "Come back to me with all your heart." Hosea said this, "I will now allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her." So the wilderness is the place where the people of God learn to rely on God. 40 years the Israelites wandered in the wilderness, and God fed them each day with manna from heaven. Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tested, and we follow him on the Lenten road year after year. What appears as nowhere is in fact the place where God is. We are reconnected with God in the wilderness, so to rest a while is not about sleeping. This is Sabbath rest. For on the seventh day, when God completed all the work of creating, God rested. Jesus is inviting his disciples to enter into the Sabbath rest. And we might imagine it more from the second story of creation, when God walks in the cool of the evening in the garden, resting, delighting, enjoying the created world. Rest connects us with God and everything else in creation. And so it's no accident then in the story that when the disciples arrived at the place, the crowds were already there. To enter into Sabbath rest is to be gathered by the love of God, recreated, renewed, and connected. The letter to the Ephesians captures this new creation theme, and it speaks in this powerful language that Christ might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace, and might reconcile both groups to God in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. So Jesus is teaching us how to gather people who have been scattered. And it begins with communion. Mark tells us Jesus had compassion on them. His heart went out to them. So this work of gathering is physical work. We have the image of Jesus on the cross. It involves his whole person. He pours out his life in love on the cross. And this is the connecting link. This is how it's done. But we have the same language in the Scriptures. Jesus tells us, you must love the Lord your God with your whole heart and mind and soul and strength. The mind itself is not enough. That's just knowledge. But to love more deeply, which involves the totality of us, only when we put all the parts together at the same time can we really be present and connected with God and one another. So Jesus moves the disciples physically into the deserted place in order to speak to their heart. The ancient Greeks believed that the heart, the most noticeable internal organ, was the seat of intelligence and memory as well as emotions. And this gives rise to our English phrase, to learn something by heart. But in our Catholic tradition, we have another image that probably comes out of that same tradition. We have the image of Jesus, the Sacred Heart, or also the Immaculate Heart of Mary. We have these images where the heart is put on the outside of the body. We're invited to gaze on these images, to be drawn into them. Love lives and thrives in the heart space. When you act out of love, it keeps us from wanting to hurt people who have hurt us. It can make the difference between being happy and being miserable and negative. When we say we're praying for someone, it could be that we're actually doing that. We're saying, I'm going to hold you in my heart space. So on the cross, Jesus holds the tension between opposites. He's not drawn to one side or the other, but he holds the tension. And that's how we can say Jesus makes peace. He gives back peace to those who hate him. This can only be done in the heart. In the mind, we're always making divisions. We're always doing separations, one side or the other, right or wrong, left, right, good, bad, making all these kind of dualistic distinctions. The head does that all the time. Thomas Merton says the mind is always either in the past or in the future. It's never present in this moment. Only the heart can move us into the present moment, to live in the tension of these opposites. A bird can be on a wire but not be electrocuted, quite simply because it does not touch the ground, to give the electricity a pathway. So we have to hold the creative tension, but don't ground it by thinking about it, critiquing it, or analyzing it. Richard Rohr offers this helpful spiritual practice. He says, next time a resentment, a negativity, or an irritation comes into your mind and you want to play it out or attach to it, move that thought or person literally into your heart space. Dualistic commentaries are lodged in your head. So put this in your heart. And you can surround this negative thought with silence and surround it with blood, which is warm. In this place, it's almost impossible to comment or to judge, to create storylines or remain antagonistic. You are in a place that does not create or feed on contraries, but it's the natural organ of life, the embodiment and love. And so in this way, the Sacred Heart is transferred to you. Christ is pointing for you to join him there. The Sacred Heart then becomes your heart too. As Paul says in the letter to the Ephesians, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. In his flesh, Christ has broken down the dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us. Christ came and preached peace. And so because of Christ, all of us can come to the Father by the same Spirit. Jesus is inviting us to come away and rest a while. He's inviting us to cross over with him into union with the Father and all of creation.